Hey, so this is definitely going to be the epitome of one of those rambly, unprofessional YouTube videos, but for my preparation for marriage class, which I'm not getting married anytime soon, but I'd highly recommend that class if you're at a school that you can take it, I was required for an assignment to make a video about something we discussed in class. And so right now, I'm going to talk about teaching kids about sex because that's a highly uncomfortable topic for me. But it was memorable, and I've had this discussion with a few roommates and just trying to figure it all out. So, in the class, our teacher really emphasized the fact that when talking about sex with kids, we need to make it as casual of a conversation as if we're talking about any other thing and just lay it down like fact, like what it is, so that they can know what their bodies do and just be at accepting so they're not questioning too much and getting curious on their own and asking other kids about things, which sounds good in theory, but then she starts going off on she has all these examples of things that her kids would do or ask growing up and how she'd handle them. And she said that she told her 3-year-old when he asked about testicles that they were to be used with his wife one day, which I think is beyond what a 3-year-old can even comprehend anyway. And I feel like there's only you gotta tell them things that are age appropriate, which is another thing we talked about in class. There was ABCs of ways to talk about sex with your kids, and you have to tell them only things that are age appropriate, which I did not think that was age appropriate, but it goes back to the idea that we're supposed to talk very openly like it's not a taboo subject. Now, I grew up in a house where it was a very taboo subject. I learned basically what I know about sex from public school. 7th grade was a fun time, and we just, even one time when it came up when I was 19, I can tell that it made my parents very uncomfortable to kind of talk about it with me and my brother in the room, and so we just kind of didn't talk about it. And I think from my background, there's a certain, I like not talking about it and not discussing sex, but it was a hard reality realizing that one day I'm going to need to talk about that with my children, because if they don't hear about it from you, they're going to hear about it from someone else at school, and they might hear all these wrong ideas, and then you don't get the chance to include your morals when you're talking about it. And I think it's important to be honest. It's hard to draw the line between being honest and age appropriate. So if your 3-year-old is asking what's a testicles, you don't have to tell them that it's for sex, but you can tell them that it's a private part that men have and women have different private parts, and that's just what makes them a boy and a girl. And that's all they need to know at that age. But then, I don't know. I think it's also just you need to practice for when it's more like your 9-year-old coming up and asking what's a virgin, or I think it was a 7-year-old that she used an example of in class, because then you gotta be honest. And it's also very important to ask the context that they're asking in, because if they're just talking about virgin olive oil, you don't want to open up the birds and the bees and shock them. And it's also important that you talk about it in a very clear tone, just like you're talking about anything else, which blows my mind, but it makes sense, because if they can sense that you're nervous talking about sex, then they're not going to want to come back and ask you any questions, and you don't know what they know, and you don't know what they think about sex or what they value, and you just lost that whole opportunity. And that's something that I'm definitely going to need to practice, because I don't know how I can talk about that to a potential 7-year-old when I feel like I can't even talk about that with my own parents. So it's definitely something to work on, and it makes it so that your kids don't have to be the awkward one in middle school asking everyone else questions about just awkward questions and having to be pulled off to the side, and they can really understand themselves more as they grow up and just understand that those feelings are natural and that they're going to feel them and that it's okay, and just teach them when it's okay. And yeah, it's uncomfortable stuff, but I also, there was a TED Talk by Julia Sweeney called It's Time for the Talk. It's only like 5 minutes, but it's worth watching, and it's about how the talk, she was very honest with the talk with her 8-year-old when she asked like how frog babies are made, and it led in from one thing into another, and then they watched videos of frogs making babies on YouTube, and then it turned into other animals. But then she started asking about like, oh, do they make videos of humans that do that? And that's when she realized that she had potentially led her daughter into internet porn, and that's where it's bad. So I don't know. I guess if anyone actually sees this video, I guess it's open for discussion. At what point is too much for kids' minds? Because in my opinion, like, I didn't know what sex was till I was 13, and like I think it was kind of nice to have that period of time of innocence where you just didn't have to worry about that stuff. Like, apparently other kids get more curious about where all that happens and find out a lot earlier in life, but I thought that it wasn't a bad thing to not know about it. And so it's hard for me to realize that it's something that I'm going to need to bring up sooner, especially with the every generation it becoming more relevant at an earlier age. And so I don't know what age is a good time to start talking about the stuff in detail, and what are good ways to keep open communication. I don't know. I'm past my time limit, so hope you enjoyed this rambling.